Recently, Netflix premieres the rather intriguing film Ladies First, starring Rosamund Pike and Sacha Cohen in the leading roles. The movie has received a pretty mixed response from audiences. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a disappointing 25-26% score, while on IMDb, it currently sits at 5.8 out of 10. Now, let me share what might be a very unpopular opinion. I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Sure, it's a raw reversal film without an especially complex plot, but what it does remarkably well is shine a spotlight on some of the ugliest aspects of patriarchy and male chauvinism. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Alexandra Reed, a channel where we talk about movies, actors and occasionally some of the issues everyone seems to be arguing about these days. Grab your favorite drink and a delicious dessert. Let's get comfortable. Don't forget to give me thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if the Hype Score feature is available to you, feel free to add your score as well. Let's get started. What is this movie about? I'm not going to walk you through the entire plot scene by scene, but there will absolutely be spoilers ahead. So if you haven't seen Ladies First yet, I'd recommend watching it first, forming your own opinion, and then coming back to tell me in the comment just how wrong or right you think I am. Oddly enough, the movie reminded me of another classic, What Women Want, starring Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt. Now, before anyone starts throwing tomatoes at their screen, I'm not saying these films are identical. They're not, but there are a few interesting parallels, and somehow I even managed to spot a little bit of Borat hiding in there too. So, at the beginning of the film, we're introduced to Damien Sachs, a cartoonishly arrogant chauvinist whose dismissive attitude toward women is demonstrated in every way the filmmakers can think of, just in case anyone in the audience misses the point. Damien sees women primarily as accessorizers to his own entertainment. They're there to make his life more enjoyable, more convenient, and occasionally more flattering to this ego. Then, thanks to the kind of accident that only happens in movies, Damien literally crashes into a pole and wakes up in a bizarre mirror world where women hold all the power. But I want to make an important distinction here, despite that some viewers might assume this isn't really a matriarchy. In fact, the film's own description suggests something much more interesting. It's still patriarchy, just with a female face. The feeling I got was that the filmmakers deliberately flipped gender roles, stereotypes, and social expectations completely upside down to show men what women often experience in everyday life. And naturally, Damien wants nothing more than to return his comfortable, familiar world. The one where he understands all the rules and, more importantly, where the rules work in his favor. Unfortunately for him, the only way back is by becoming CEO of the company. A simple task, really. About as simple as becoming an Olympic athlete by watching motivational TikToks. Still, Damien convinces himself that talent and competence alone will be enough to reach the top and reclaim his old life. Bless his heart, and the story progresses. Damien begins to suspect that qualifications may not be only currency being exchanged in executive offices. So he decides to pursue a different strategy, seduce his boss. Notice what he doesn't decide to do. He doesn't decide to work harder. He doesn't decide to improve his performance. He doesn't suddenly become passionate about professional growth. Deep down, he probably realized so things won't be enough anyway. And here's where the movie lands one of its more uncomfortable observations. In the real world, women are often expected to work harder, faster, and better than their male colleagues just to achieve the same level of recognition, frequently sacrificing parts of their personal and family lives along the way. But let's get back to the movie before YouTube decides I've wandering into a sociology lecture. At a certain point, Damien concludes that becoming successful, desirable, and professionally valuable requires something else entirely: cosmetic treatment and physical perfection. And that's where I started seeing the strongest connection to movie, what women want. Both protagonists are forced to experience pieces of the female daily routine firsthand. Sacha Baron Cohen's character goes through hair removal, skincare treatment, workouts, and all the rituals which society quietly labels as optional, while simultaneously expecting women to do them. Mel Gibson's character went through a very similar journey years earlier. Maybe that's why the section of the movie gave me a strange sense of nostalgia. Not because the films tell the same story, but because they belong to a tradition of comedies that use role reversal to explore social double standards. And honestly, we don't get nearly enough of those anymore. But Ladies First delivers all of that with a little more energy, a little more bite, and a lot more confidence. Then again, what else would you expect from Sacha Baron Cohen? This is the man who gave us Borat and Bruno, movies that don't just use satire and irony. They grab them by the shoulders, crank them up to 11, and then keep turning the dial until it breaks. Subtlety has never really been his thing. And honestly, that's exactly why so many people love him. Whether he's playing a clueless Kazakh journalist, a flamboyant fashion reporter, or a man trapped in a gender-swept corporative nightmare, Cohen has always had a talent for exposing uncomfortable truths by making people laugh first and squirm second. That same energy is all over Ladies First. The movie isn't trying to whisper its message politely from the corner of the room. It's standing on a table, waving its arms and yelling, "Do you see how ridiculous this looks now?" And sometimes satire works best when it stops pretending to be subtle. Sure, the film occasionally feels about as delicate as being hit in the face with a PowerPoint presentation titled Gender Double Standards, an introduction, but I suspect there's intentional. The goal isn't realism, the goal is exaggeration, because sometimes the fastest way to make people notice an unfair rule is to force them to experience it from the other side. And if that process happens to be funny, awkward, and slightly absurd along the way, well, that's very much in the line with the Sacha Baron Cohen playbook. As you might expect, the story eventually develops a rather unusual romantic subplot between the two leads. They discover that they're highly attracted to one another, and before long they end up sleeping together. But the next morning, Damien learns that he's lost the race for the seer position. Despite delivering what appears to be an impressive presentation, the job goes to Alex Fox, Rosamund Pike's character. And according to the movie's logic, she gets the promotion largely because she's a woman. It's an obvious mirror image of the assumption that Damien himself only reached his position because he was a man. His hard work, preparation, and polished presentation suddenly don't seem to matter very much. Now I will admit that it felt a little strange that a mid-level manager with limited executive experience could realistically be handed the top leadership role in the company. The writers seem to quietly sidestep that particular issue and hope nobody asks too many questions. Alex then fires Damien after he responds to the promotion decision with some fairly spectacular displays of bitterness and disrespect. But here's where the movie takes another sharp turn, because Damien and Alex had slept together. Damien decides to lawyer up, and suddenly, surprise, surprise, the company finds itself facing a potential workplace scandal involving sex, power, and discrimination. At that point, the shareholders come up with what may be the least believable corporate solution ever written into a screenplay. They don't simply reinstate him, they promote him straight into CEO. Now, maybe I'm missing some truly extraordinary case study from business history, but personally, I can't think of many situations where a terminated employee walks into a legal dispute and walks out with a corner office. Still, that's a movie solution and it serves a very specific purpose because Damien has finally completed the mission that would allow him to return home. The moment he sits in the CEO's chair, he's transported back into his familiar world. A world full of toxic masculinity, male privilege, and rules that conveniently work in his favor. Only this time, something has changed. He is no longer seeing the world through the same eyes. He has spent time in the other side of the divide. He has experienced what it feels like to be dismissed, underestimated, and judged primarily because of his gender. And because of that, he immediately starts trying to correct some of the mistakes he made before. Not just for himself, but for the people around him and perhaps surprisingly for the company as well. So yes, the film ultimately gives us a happy ending. Whether it's a realistic ending is a completely different question. Criticism: how realistic is the movie and what issues it is actually raising. Benjamin Lee of The Guardian gave film 1 from 5 stars, describing its excruciatingly unfunny high concept through experiment and a critical waste of talent, a murderous row of actors who hopefully got paid handsomely for the embarrassment of this whiffing up their IMDb's pages. Summarizing the film as unshamedly silly, tiresomely unfun, and by the end, laughably earnest. Robbie Colling of the Daily Telegraph gave it 2 from 5 stars, writing, "The dready plot which eventually kicks in and has Baron Cohen and Pike vying for a promotion feels like something cut from one of the weaker Bridget Jones films, albeit shot in that odd Netflix house style that somehow looks simultaneously expensive and cheap." Variety's Todd Gilchrist wrote, "The most interesting read on Ladies First is a metatextual one, where Cohen's most famous creation, the cheerfully chauvinistic Borat, gets emotionally vivisected by Pike's calculating Gone Girl character, Amy Dunn." Rotten Tomatoes gives 25-26% of positive views to this film. Not much at all. Despite all flaws, I actually think the filmmakers did a pretty decent job. I watched the movie from the beginning to the end, and yes, this is very much a light comedy designed for a single evening of entertainment. It's not the kind of film that will leave you staring at the ceiling for 3 weeks, questioning the meaning of the existence. It's a fun, fast-moving comedy with the same kind of provocative humor that made Borat and Bruno cultural phenomena. But even at that level, I think the movie succeeds at something important. It gets people thinking about gender stereotypes and about how many aspects of our world are still designed with men as a default setting. Take something as similar as car safety system, office temperatures, furniture dimensions, or the placement of handrails on public transportation. They're just the obvious examples. Dig a little deeper and you'll find that for decades much of medical research was conducted primarily on male subjects. Women often experience strokes differently than men, yet most people are familiar only with the classic symptoms that were identified through studies of male patients. Autism can present differently in girls than in boys, but diagnosis criteria were historically developed largely around how autism appeared in boys. There aren't conspiracy theories, there are examples of what happens when one group becomes the default reference point for society. And that's exactly the kind of issue Ladies First is trying to highlight. The movie approached those topics through exaggeration, satire, and outright absurdity. The filmmakers intentionally crank everything up to ridiculous levels so that problems we normally overlook suddenly become impossible to ignore. By the end of the film, Damien finally acknowledges Alex's abilities and helps her receive the position she genuinely deserves. But that's a solution for one person. It doesn't actually change the system itself. And that's an important distinction because the controversy isn't really about whether women are competent enough to succeed. It's about how often women's achievements are less visible, less celebrated, or more heavily scrutinized than men's, even when the effort and results are comparable. There's another point that I think is worth mentioning. The film doesn't actually portray a true matriarchy. What it shows is essentially the same toxic power structure we already seen, just with women occupying the position of authority. In many ways, it feels like a satirical visualization of particular fare, a world where men experience the same kind of limitations, assumptions, and blazes that women have historically encountered. That's why I don't see Ladies First as a fantasy about female rule. I see it as a distorted mirror. The social mechanisms remain largely the same. The only thing that changes is the direction they are pointed. And that's what makes the film interesting. No, it doesn't offer a blueprint for fixing society. No, it isn't particularly subtle. And no, it probably won't win awards for nuanced political commentary. But it does encourage its viewers to question some assumptions they've accepted as normal simply because they've all been there. And honestly, that's not a bad achievement for a comedy. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. Let me know in the comment section what you're thinking about Ladies First and whether you agree with the ideas behind it or not. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If the hype score feather is available to you, feel free to add your score as well. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!